Hey, I'm Hamish and this is Writing on Games. Have you ever seen people frantically applaud the addition of vaulting over fences to a video game? If you were at last year's PC gaming show, then you would have, as Brandon Green, the soft-spoken man behind the then few-month-old and still worst-named game ever Playerunknown's Battlegrounds, was treated as some kind of celebrity, with fans eagerly clinging on to his every word, as he explained what the team at PUBG Corporation had in mind for the game's future. He'd been turned into a millionaire basically overnight, with what was at the time 3 million copies sold, and what would eventually turn into 50 million at the time of writing, making it easily the most popular game on Steam in terms of sheer numbers. The energy in the room was palpable. As silly as it seems now, I was one of those people clapping. Battlegrounds was all my friends and I could talk about for a good month or so. By that time, I'd put almost 40 hours into it. I called its high-stakes gameplay a recalibration of the way we view violence in the medium. You'd hear developer rumblings discussing not only how to get on the bandwagon, but what innovations could be brought to the Battle Royale arena. It really felt like the industry was on the brink of some grand sea change thanks to what found its roots as a mod made by one guy. Cut to 1 year later, however, and you have the same show that treated Green as a rock star now devoid of his presence entirely, host Day 9 trying to keep audience attention as he wearily joked about the assembly line of 1v100 games being trodden out, as said audience groaned and began to leave. My personal interest in the games had long faded from anything I'd actually want to play to viewing them as cultural touchstones, still fascinated at how this craze had so flipped the industry on its head. A couple of months earlier, we saw a studio headed up by one of the industry's most prominent figures release their own take on the genre, then announce they were folding 1 month later. What were previously the industry's most popular titles, leading the way for countless knockoffs of their own formula, are now themselves knocking off a genre, and what's more, people don't want to hear it. Publishers are tired of hearing pitches for Battle Royale titles.
They basically were like, do you guys have any Battle Royale pitches? And then you smash cut to like 3 weeks later. That was actually at GDC. Then at DICE, everyone's like, you guys better not be bringing us any stupid fucking Battle Royale pitches.
The former titan of the genre is now on the defensive, engaged in a daft copyright infringement lawsuit with its at one point unlikely competitor Fortnite, which at the time of writing has just been dropped without explanation. What the hell is going on here? All topped off with a waning and increasingly disgruntled player base tired of waiting for basic quality of life improvements. Call of Duty had multiple games under its belt before it captured the zeitgeist with Modern Warfare. Even Minecraft took a few years to become the household name and children's merchandise factory we know it as today. In a fraction of that time, we've seen a genre thrust into the spotlight, had all the usual imitators trying it on, seen the failures of those imitators, and the onset of fatigue from players. Battle Royale has indeed been one of the most disruptive forces the industry has seen in quite some time. I just don't know at this point if its longevity outside of 1 or 2 games can be so guaranteed. So what the hell happened? How did we get so quickly to this point where the highest selling game on Steam has lost so much of its public favour to a competitor whose initial and underwhelming PvE release was so long in the making that it was considered a joke as to if it would come out at all? Moreover, how has Fortnite essentially boarded up the walls to further competitors trying to enter the genre? Well, in a broad sense, and in this one particular writer's opinion, we can break it down to a couple of things: mechanics and release models. You see, one of the weirdest things about stepping back into PUBG every so often, especially given its recent decline, is that as much as its release left the industry scrambling, it remains largely the same bare-bones experience it was when it came out. Not a lot has changed between early access and 1.0. A couple of extra maps, a new menu layout, some added customization options, but at its core it's still the same PUBG. Initially, this simplicity was part of the game's charm. It was last man standing and nothing else mattered. The barren landscape you found yourself sprinting across felt decidedly post-apocalyptic, and wandering through it invoked real fear and dread, as the openness of the environment made it feel like you could be being watched at any given point. Suddenly, the player absurdity you saw in its lobby turned into a much tenser experience than your typical shooter, as every step taken increased the stakes of those matches that would often go on for upwards of 20 to 30 minutes. As time went on, however, I began to notice that thanks to the game's gargantuan map, the matches my friends and I participated in would often descend into one of two things. Either we spawned so far out of the constantly restricting arena that we'd spend most of our time frantically chasing the circle, or we'd land in the perfect spot within it where moving would simply expose us to more danger than it was worth. It resulted in a lot of top 10 placements, sure, because pacifism is, to some extent, a viable strategy, whether intentional or otherwise, but at the cost of half an hour of doing not very much, running in a straight line or standing fairly still, often devolving into finding the sickest jumps or engaging in occasional friendly fire to pass the time before inevitably getting mowed down out of nowhere. And this, to me, became one of PUBG's biggest problems. It's a game with a lot of downtime. It requires a considerable time investment from people taking matches in any way seriously, and doesn't offer a lot in return. Death comes quickly in PUBG and sends you right back to the menu. It's arguably one of the game's defining characteristics. But after a while, the prospect of spending so long running across flat, empty landscapes, only to get gunned down by people you often didn't have much of a chance of defending yourself against, felt inevitable, futile, less like the tense, immersive experience I found initially, and more like some virtual chat room with a game in the background, I guess. But work was being done to improve the experience. You know, as much as I joked about it at the start, the addition of vaulting is neat. It offers more tactical considerations than you might expect, thanks to the newfound ability to jump through windows, allowing, for example, a team to strategically breach a building. Given how initially approaching a building's door only to find it open would send your mind racing, it's an update that speaks to how small changes within such a simple formula can be significant. A new desert map didn't fix the game's downtime problem. In fact, thanks to its increased size, it arguably made things way worse. But hey, it was some desperately needed new content. The problem was that it all took months to implement, coming long after people had tired of repeating the same process in matches, and dealing with the game's numerous performance problems that the more the developer rushed to 1.0's promised but arbitrary pre-2018 launch date, became harder and harder to justify as mere early access jank. Essentially, people like me were devouring a game suddenly forced into the spotlight and burning out when they found that Battlegrounds simply couldn't keep up with public demand for meaningful changes. What's more, by the time these updates were implemented, we'd already seen the reveal of a new mode in a recently released game that was starting to remedy these issues. Enter Fortnite, with not only a smaller map, but a denser one. Rocks, trees, and bushes are abundant, offering cover opportunities, and not only that, but you can create your own defenses. Movement is faster and snappier, you don't have the same level of visual and mechanical bugs you'd find in PUBG. Suddenly, the tedium of running across empty maps only to die in an instant is replaced with a means of effectively reacting to threats. Matches aren't as much of a time investment thanks to a more focused arena, and encounters feel fairer. You don't simply need to climb to a higher vantage point. What if you could create your own? What's more, as a result of this change, this added flexibility, there's always something to do in Fortnite. In PUBG, once you're sufficiently armed, there really isn't much point in exploring any further. In Fortnite, if you're not fighting or moving, you're collecting resources. It runs better, and it has a distinct visual style of its own rather than looking like some amorphous mod made by a bunch of edgelords. Low versus high level play is suddenly far easier to distinguish, and thus more interesting to watch as part of a streaming audience, for instance, as it isn't merely a case of how many kills you can get anymore, but instead you'd see these weird feats of engineering as someone would hear a shot and suddenly build a fortress around them in seconds. Given that streaming was a big part of how the genre so quickly found its cultural foothold, this doesn't feel insignificant. And whereas PUBG was racing towards a version 1.0 it wasn't ready for, Fortnite is still embracing its early access status, utilising Epic's large team, their more stable platform they have available thanks to their long in development PvE release, and now incredible amounts of money thanks to cosmetic options and a battle pass system that provided more structured challenges to those willing to pay, all in service of bringing constant updates to new players with new modes, weapons and cosmetics. All the while Battlegrounds is playing catch up in the background, trying to utilise their own pass system, despite the fact that there's still an initial cost to entry. Fortnite, on the other hand, is getting you into the game for free and allowing you to further acquire battle passes through play and earning of its currency of V-Bucks. Now, none of this is to say that PUBG is somehow a bad game if you enjoy it. I'm not even saying that Fortnite is some amazing experience by comparison. Honestly, Battle Royale games don't do much for me at all anymore. What I am saying is that when discussing how Fortnite overtook Battlegrounds in terms of public opinion, it's inarguably the more accessible title, a more distilled, functionally polished version of PUBG's formula, requiring neither the financial nor time investment of its main competitor, and offering far more in return. It's bright and colourful, and the place names are like Disneyland attractions, and numbers pour out of enemies rather than blood, all making for something far more easily marketable to a younger audience, and as we saw with Minecraft, the game that hits that market is always going to come out on top in the long run. And like Minecraft, its imitators are already being viewed with derision, seen as little more than easy cash grabs even in the AAA space, making serious competition for Fortnite's throne seem less and less likely. For evidence of this, we need only look to a game like Radical Heights, yet another ill-fated attempt by Cliff Bleszinski's Boss Key Productions to get in on the ground floor of hype in a particular genre. Except this time, it's actually brought the studio down along with it, all in the space of a month. Which might seem odd because on a systems level, Radical Heights actually does some pretty interesting things. And like PUBG's vaulting, it's all in the little details. In Radical Heights' case, its small addition to the genre formula is the introduction of currency, gained through bashing tills and killing enemies, which is then used to purchase weapons, equipment, heal yourself, etc. What's interesting about this is that it introduced a concept not seen in other games of its type. Permanency, built right into the game's DNA, as opposed to being added arbitrarily through the purchase of a battle pass. See, what Heights allows you to do is choose to deposit some of that money you've collected at ATMs strewn throughout the map, in order to withdraw it in future matches. It's a slow enough process to leave you feeling vulnerable, and weapons are expensive enough that you couldn't just buy your way to victory, meaning that as opposed to feeling imbalanced, like a few players had an unfair advantage or bought their way to victory, it acts as something of a small boost for savvy players willing to take that risk. It feels like you are, in some way, contributing to something larger than an individual match, bringing to mind the revelation of something like Call of Duty's progression system. On top of that, you have a different means of spawning into the map, with the absence of a plane or bus forcing players into particular spots, potentially allowing for a more carefully curated environment to heighten action, for example. Honestly, with its small but significant changes to what have become genre norms, Radical Heights showed a lot of unique promise. The problem? Well, Boss Keys had the experienced team, the budget, and the sense to go free to play early for the sake of populating their servers. What they didn't have there was years of development time like Fortnite's PvE mode had. This wasn't simply slapping a Battle Royale mode on an existing polished game. This was an alpha build rushed out as quickly as possible to capture that hype. About as early access as you could possibly get, and it showed. The game looks like a late PS2 release, buildings are often completely textureless, visual glitches are common, and now that the game's developer has been shuttered, I guess we'll never see what lay behind that mysterious other option in the character creator. Essentially, after being burned by the promises that PUBG would become drastically more polished as time went on, first impressions matter more than ever, and despite the very real potential its concept showed, it was hard to see Radical Heights as anything other than a mess thanks to its presentation. For so long, games have seen early access as a means of making money while that polish is being applied, but perhaps more so than any other game, Radical Heights' launch was so catastrophic as to act as a real warning sign to developers viewing the release model as a given. even in the most popular genre going right now, if you don't have the polish of something like Fortnite up front, your battle will be decidedly uphill in nature. But honestly, it arguably had to release that early. At this stage, people are tired of hearing about Battle Royale games. It's a spectre seen to be ruining more established series with its presence. In order to release a game with the polish to take on something like Fortnite, you're looking at development time spanning way past the point of saturation and player fatigue. And even then, when that game finally releases, it will likely face the MMO problem, that being that no matter how good an online game might be, it means nothing if all your friends are playing World of Warcraft. Radical Heights isn't actually a bad game by any means, it just happened to be part of an industry trend where everything has to move at 1,000,000 miles a minute in order to compete, and waiting to release a perfectly functional product is as futile as getting on that hype train as early as possible at the expense of quality. In this new release landscape created by games like PUBG and Fortnite, you're damned if you do and damned if you don't. In all, in 2017, the future seemed bright for Battle Royale. In 2018, it seems bright for Fortnite specifically. It got in on the ground floor, establishing itself as the king of the genre through its polish and heightened accessibility over its competition, thanks to the resources it had readily available in a way no other game did. And that's not to say that things are totally grim and unsalvageable for something like Battlegrounds. Its numbers are still astronomical and people are still playing. It's just clear to see that even those that jumped on the Battle Royale bandwagon early are suffering. And unfortunately, we've still likely yet to see the genre's nadir, as developers and publishers who tried the genre on are probably anticipating how pricey a mistake they might have made putting their eggs in this tenuously constructed basket. And again, this is all just the speculation and observations of one dude. Who knows where it could go from here? Hell, given how quickly we've seen the landscape shift away from PUBG's favour, and how spectacularly little time seems to pass between major industry-shifting developments in this arena, it's entirely possible that in a month or so we'll be charting Fortnite's fall from grace. I just think it's particularly unlikely that, in that case, we'll see anywhere near as successful a competitor to replace it. So I hope you enjoyed my piece on Battle Royale. As always, these videos are made possible by your unbelievably generous support over on Patreon, so if you want to help the show, maybe consider donating. Every pledge helps more than you can possibly know. Special thanks go to Mark B. Writing, Nico Blakely, Rob, Michael Wolf, Artyom Vitsyuk, Spike Jones, The Nameless Guy, Chris Wright, Dr. Motorcycle, Harry Fuertes, Hamigas, Travis Bennett, Zach Casserly, Samuel Pickens, Tom Nash, Shardfire, Philip Lange, Anna Pimentel, Jesse Ryan, Brandon Robinson, Justin's Holderness, Biggie Smith, Peter, Christian Kuhneman, Camel Traffic, Nicholas Ross, and Charlie Yang. And with that, I've been Hamish, and this has been Writing on Games. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.